there was a time when I was 14 when my mom and I had a car accident and we went over a cliff.
Mm.
Actually, no, I think I was younger. I think it was 12 or 13, but went over a cliff in the mountain area. And I just remember being in this Land Rover and looking down, and there's just this barbed wire holding us from going
Mm.
down. And the next thing I know, we are surrounded by Pakistanis who are pulling us out of this vehicle. A bus just saw this, stopped, and pulled us to safety. So there was a
You don't
there
hear
was
about those experiences on the news as far as
no, no.
Hello, everyone. It's a joy to be here with my very good friend and actually the godmother of my son Isaac, Marilyn Gardner. And so, welcome, Marilyn, to our Orthodox Dialogues series.
Thank you. I'm really honored to be here.
Thank you so much. I'm honored to have you and very excited. It's something that I've been excited about for about a month or so since we saw each other in Boston, and I brought up the idea, and we were having
Yeah.
such great conversations there that I thought it would be neat to bring this to, our viewers on the YouTube channel. So yeah, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us.
Yeah,
Um,
very excited about this. Thanks.
Thank you. So I'm going to just share a little bit about your background so that everybody can hear a little bit about that, and then we'll have the chance to dive into to some questions. So Marilyn Gardner is a public health nurse and writer. You grew up in Pakistan, and you raised your own 5 kids in Pakistan, Egypt, and the United States. She makes her home in Rockport, Massachusetts, and works in the city of Boston, teaching community health workers from immigrant communities around the state of Massachusetts. She's the author of Between Worlds, Essays on Culture and Belonging, and Worlds Apart, A Third Culture Kid's Journey, and has also written for Plow Magazine, Fathom Magazine, Among Worlds Magazine, and her own blog, which I can vouch for is an amazing blog, Communicating Across Boundaries. After a long and often reluctant journey, Marilyn entered the Orthodox Church with her husband in 2013. She loves her passport, family, and faith in reverse order. I love that. That's just a beautiful phrasing there. Um, so again, welcome. It's so wonderful to have you and to be able to have this chance to, as I said before, lovingly interrogate you about your life and your journey. So without any further ado, I'd like to just dive in by asking our first question, which is quite simply, who are you, Marilyn? Who are you?
So the bio said a little bit of it.
Sure.
Uh, Marilyn Gardner. I actually I am something that's called a third culture kid. So I don't know if your viewers know what this is, but a third culture kid is someone who grew up in a country that was different, country or countries that was different than their parents' passport country. So in my case, my parents took me to Pakistan when I was 3 months old. And I begin with that just because that shaped me so profoundly. You know, as I was growing up in Pakistan, first in a small town, and then followed by boarding school. And then we would go back home in the winters, and then in the summers, my mom would come up to the mountains where the boarding school was. So that really shaped me. It shaped my faith. It shaped my sense of who I was as a person. It was constantly living between. So when I think about probably the words that capture my life best, it would be between worlds. So I went through high school in Pakistan. I came to the United States. I became a nurse. And after I became a nurse, I did what many college graduates do, and that's I went home. The difference was that my home was thousands of miles away. So I went back to Pakistan to work as a nurse. I actually got deported. That's a whole other story.
Mm.
I ended up back in the US, met my husband, and the two of us embarked on a life overseas initially. I have five children raised, and they were born on three continents and raised on three continents. And so that, in a nutshell, it is where it all started. And we moved to the United States from Egypt. So we raised our children in Pakistan, Egypt, and the United States. We moved to the United States when the oldest was 11 and the youngest was 1.
Mm. Wow. Yeah. So here's a question for you, based on your characterization of saying that you sort of see yourself as living in this in between um, uh, dynamic, I guess. And what would you say as a child, if you can kind of recall your memories as a child, what that in betweenness sort of felt like? Because I mean,
Mhm.
as an adult, it's easy to kind of, or not easy, but we can obviously reflect more on it conceptually. You know, you kind of characterize yourself as a third culture kid, which is a
Mhm.
whole kind of designation that um, you share with other people and can have conversations with them about it. But obviously, as a child, there's this very pre-rational sense
Right.
of what's going on as an American, the child of Americans living in Pakistan, and then not only living in Pakistan but actually studying at a boarding school.
Mhm.
And yeah, I'm just curious if you are able to tap into some of those kind of like pre-rational feelings or that kind of sense of what that felt like being in this in between space. I'd be very curious to hear that.
Right, right. So that's such a good question because so often when we're thinking back to childhood, we put these adult feelings onto it. And I remember when I was writing, really not wanting to do that, when I was writing this second book that's more memoir. So, um, before you even know you're human, your life is surrounded by, in our case, there was a mosque on each corner of our building.
Mm,
And so the call to prayer was really just this cacophony that woke us up. And this is the Muslim call to prayer, and it comes 5 times a day. It calls the faithful to pray, and so that became my alarm clock.
mhm,
And I knew I was raised in this safety, in a sense, of a missionary community. I knew that I wasn't Pakistani. Inside the house, while outside were mosques and majority Muslim population, inside our house, our house was ordered by Bibles and daily prayer. And and so I knew I wasn't Pakistani, but wow, I still remember at 4 years old going to the US. And those are my very first memories of the US. And you're 4 years old, right? So you're still young, but you have this whole uh, this whole childhood already of experiences that are really different than suddenly, being plopped down in a small town in Massachusetts. I
mm.
do remember snow. I remember being so cold. It was the first time I had encountered snow. And I struggle with snow to this day, although I'm
Yeah,
getting better.
that's
Uh,
why we moved down to Atlanta. But no,
there you go. Yeah, I'm
yeah,
not going to tell your mom.
I
And
know.
so you've got, yeah, before you're even human, the first, the first words you hear outside of, the delivery room are those 3 months, but the words that you
Mm,
hear when you know their words, they were Urdu. They
mm,
were, and I knew though, one of the things that I do remember knowing from very young is that faith was important, right?
mm,
Because faith faith surrounded me. Faith was
Hmm.
in the Pakistanis that surrounded me. Faith was in the missionary community that surrounded me. So I did
Probably
know
in
that.
more ways than you would have experienced in America, even though it was a different faith tradition. Yeah,
Right,
more
right. I think
immersive kind of sense about it, right?
no, that's right. It was very immersive, which is interesting thinking about it because that is something that then as an adult was very compelling for me about Orthodoxy. It's a whole other story, but I
Interesting. Yeah.
watched Muslims live out their life in with great faithfulness. That
Hmm.
5 times a day. I remember being really young and visiting a Pakistani friend of my mom's, and the Pakistani friend of my, she challenged my mom and she said, "So we pray 5 times a day. What about you? What do you do?" Now my mom was really good. She said, "Well, our holy book tells us to pray without
Without
ceasing."
ceasing. Yeah.
And she said, "But
Interesting.
I've learned from you." And from then on, she
Mm.
actually did get up at
Mm.
the first call to prayer, and
So
she would
interesting.
begin her prayers that way.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
so I remember the faithfulness of my parents. Um, I remember the kindness that was ever present. There's a memory I have of being on my dad put me on his bike. He was driving me to a church service. You have to, for your listeners, the context of this is this struggling Christian community in Pakistan. Like Christians are not, they are not wealthy. They do not have status. They rarely have good jobs in Pakistan.
Mm.
It's a minority, and it's oftentimes a persecuted minority.
Mm.
So often my parents we were the only Westerners living in a town.
Mm.
And so my mom was staying home that night. It was a Sunday night service, and my dad put me on the bike. And as he was biking, my foot slipped and went into the wheel.
Mm.
And I just remember my dad, being so worried about me. But what I remember as well is just being surrounded by Pakistanis who were taking care of me.
Mm.
And that repeated itself several times during my life. There was a time when I was 14 when my mom and I had a car accident and we went over a cliff.
Mm.
Actually, no, I think I was younger. I think it was 12 or 13, but went over a cliff in the mountain area. And I just remember being in this Land Rover and looking down, and there's just this barbed wire holding us from going
Mm.
down. And the next thing I know, we are surrounded by Pakistanis who are pulling us out of this vehicle. A bus just saw this, stopped, and pulled us to safety. So there was
You don't
there
hear
was
about those experiences on the news as far as
no, no. And
you
that
know,
actually,
internationally.
that was really difficult for me then as I transitioned to the United States and I recognized that this Pakistan that I had grown up with, which was a place of color and light
Mm.
and beauty and amazing food and kindness, was known on this kind of world stage of being a place of terror and
Mm.
a breeding ground for terrorists, and trying to reconcile that
Mm.
is really really difficult.
Wow.
And I learned as I became an adult, I learned many things. First of all, I my parents went when Pakistan was only 8 years old. So Pakistan was a young country and was just trying to find its identity outside of the greater Indian subcontinent. And I mean, sometimes I think it still struggles to find that identity.
Mm.
And along come my parents, white Americans, and the Brits had really not left that long ago. I
Mm.
didn't know that as a kid.
Sure,
I
sure.
thought it was normal to be in a line of people and to be ushered to the front.
Wow.
And that does a number as well on
Hmm. Hmm.
um, because you start thinking you are much more special than you actually are. So that's been some of my spiritual journey
Sure.
as well. I'm not quite as special as I often think I am.
Oh man. That's a very honest recognition, that we all could learn from for sure. Um, but wow, I mean, there's so much to process and to kind of uh, absorb in what you said. I guess one thing I'm curious about is as you reflect on your memories of, the way that your child self would have experienced that life, it made me also wonder how your parents experienced that life. Um,
Mhm.
and just as missionaries in Pakistan, I mean, you gave a little glimpse as far as your mom, kind of having that dialogue with the local Pakistani woman, I think you said it was, who
Right.
was challenging her about the frequency of prayer, and then the fact that she shared that from the Bible, but also learned something herself.
Right.
And yeah, I guess I'm curious to hear about what your thoughts are as far as your parents' experience as missionaries in Pakistan, and how they would have yeah, experienced it as Americans coming to this foreign land.
Right, right. Such a good question. When they went, they were the first people from their particular mission, along with two other couples. And the circumstances that they found themselves in were uh, pretty rustic,
Hmm.
pretty
So they were
rustic.
really trailblazers, and as far as
Oh,
their
they were
missionary group was
very,
concerned.
very much trailblazers. Blazers.
Interesting.
I look at some of what they encountered, and I just shake my head. Basically, they and two other couples were being prepared by what was then called the Conservative Baptist Foreign Mission Society, which is funny because when my husband met me, he said, "Your parents are Conservative Baptist. Isn't that a redundant term?"
That's funny. That's
But
funny.
they were with this mission and they were heading to India. And then India closed for all missionaries,
Mm,
and Pakistan opened up.
mm,
Basically, they were told, "Oh, there's this new country; it's right next door." And I think they were like, "Well, why not?"
let's go. Yeah.
So they left on a ship. It was the Queen Mary, or the steel recorder was that one. The
Mm,
going back, it was the Queen Mary,
wow.
but the steel recorder and the pictures. I mean, my mom is in white gloves, pearls, a hat. She is dressed to the
Wow.
nines, holding a little baby. So it was my
And
oldest
had
brother,
had they
Edward.
been missionaries anywhere prior to that, or this
Never,
was their first
nowhere.
experience? Wow.
Nowhere. My mom heard this Swedish missionary that she describes as this large man with a booming voice. She heard him when she was 5 years old at this little Baptist church in New England, in the small town of Winchendon in Massachusetts.
Hmm.
And she heard him, and some kind of fire was lit in her,
Mm,
and it never died.
mm.
So they actually they went to your alma mater. They went to Gordon College.
Okay. All
It
right.
was Gordon College when it was in the Fenway area,
Hmm.
and she met my dad there, and
Wow.
so they ended up getting married. And my dad had this call as well. And as a missionary kid, is a whole. I'm digressing, but you hear about this call of God your whole life, and you're just it's
Mysterious
like
call.
yeah. So in part of it, um, it kind of affects you not in the best way because you keep
Mm,
on waiting for a call.
sure.
And I remember this. I remember this house parent of mine in boarding school really helping me because she said she was talking to a group of us, and she said, "You know what? We talk a lot about the call of God, but the call of God, it's a call to Himself.
Mm,
Other
beautiful.
things
Yeah.
are outside things. It
Yep.
might then be a call to a place, but she said,
Sure.
if we're called to anything else, what happens when that ends? If we're called to be a
Right.
wife and our husband dies, if we're called to be, to go to a country and the country closes. So
Sure.
that was really
That's
helpful. But back
beautiful.
to my
Yeah.
parents. Um, so I mean, there was a lot of loneliness, and they lived in
Mm,
they and these two other couples. So there were three couples, that was six of them, and five kids. And one couple, the couple with the three kids, got one room, and my parents shared a room with this other couple and their kid
mm.
for 3 months.
Mm.
And they couldn't figure out why. I mean, and they were anxious to get out of this situation. It was the only living quarters they could find in this city of Larkana. And they were anxious to get out of it, but they couldn't figure out why this one Muslim gentleman who befriended them was so anxious for them to get out. And it turned out that they were renting in what was really the red light district.
Oh my goodness.
And they
Yeah.
said when they found that out, they realized, oh wow, we did wonder why the women were so friendly. So
Oh my
so
goodness.
like that, right? That
What
you
a first introduction to missionary.
yeah, and that this
Oh
and
my goodness.
again that this Muslim, they
Hmm.
had come to save
Right,
him,
exactly.
you
Yeah.
know what, and
Mm.
he was definitely saving them by
Oh my
helping them to
goodness.
find these places.
Yes,
How they found
yeah, that's
how
just
they got their second house was Hindus came in the middle of the night and gave them this set of keys and said,
mm,
we want you to have the keys to our house because we don't want the Muslim neighbors to take it.
mm,
And so um, for years, the mission ended up having that house.
mm,
But there were so many lonely times. I mean, their faith was so shaped
mm,
by this. And there were at one point, I know it was after they'd been in Pakistan, I want to say 8 years, and they were back in the US. And my dad just he thought, I can't go back.
mm,
It's just too
mm,
hard. This is an impossible task. And the Protestant church in the United States was a voice for wanting results and how many
mhm,
Muslims,
mhm,
converted sort of thing. And they were trying to make sense of that as well.
mm,
So they were seeing their whole worldview reshaped, their whole view of Christianity really reshaped.
mhm, mhm,
Um, and he ended up having a sort of an epiphany of sorts of reading the book of Acts and seeing this picture of this worldwide picture of God working and suddenly feeling like, oh, I'm a tiny, tiny part of this. And
mhm.
that was just enough to sort of boost him, if you will, to go back. But yeah, I mean, my brother had a car accident where in Turkey where he almost died. And so they got the news of that. Within 2 years after arriving in Pakistan, my mom got a telegram saying her father had died.
Mm,
There were times where we almost died. My mom almost died of malaria, and
mm,
my dad was beside himself. These 5 kids and this wife who was really almost dying of malaria. He got a telegram to a doctor, and she sent back 2 words: try, I want to say palindrome. I
mm,
probably got that right. Try this certain drug. He went and he woke up the chemist in the middle of the night and
mm,
said, please give me this, and took it back to her, and she took it and lived. So I grew
mm.
up with these stories. And so this strong sense that in all of this, that there was this loving care and that our family somehow mattered to God. I don't know if that makes
Oh yeah.
sense.
No, it definitely makes sense. Yeah. Wow. Yeah, again, there's so much there. I'm just kind of absorbing it and processing it, but it's I guess that epiphany that your father had as far as like is almost like this way to break out of the, I mean, you kind of said it was within the Protestant church, but I guess you could say it was like the American mindset of success,
Yeah.
like driven, measurable outcome
Yes.
type of
Yes.
perspective, and that somehow something, or perhaps God, sort of gave him this insight to, see that, yeah, he was this very small part, but that's a very liberating thing, because if you attached to this measurable outcome thing. Maybe there's this like subtle savior complex kind of,
Yes.
you know,
Yes.
that I'm this a big part of,
Yeah.
and if you kind of get that somehow, that humility in relation to what God's doing, and also the universality is what struck me too, like that sense of God saving the whole world, like the whole cosmos, and not just the enlightened America, or one part of, that there was this kind of sense of smallness, of largeness of God, and also like that encompassed the whole world,
Yeah.
is a really powerful thing to consider.
It's so interesting you say that because I was just thinking about that. I was thinking about the Nativity hymn that says, Thy nativity, O Christ our God, has shown to the world the
Yep.
light of wisdom. And I remember this year it hit me in a whole different way that this is something for the world, and how dare we diminish it to be
And also, if
anything other than
if I
that.
if I could just add a little linguistic kind of note that would affirm this even more. There are two words for world in Greek. There's
Mm,
cosmos, right? And oikoumeni, which oikoumeni literally means the inhabited world.
mm.
So like basically referring to all the people that make up the world, whereas the cosmos refers to everything, 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 including angels, including other
Okay.
other planets, and other, like, the whole thing. So it's like the nativity hymn is not just he enlightened the inhabited world, but it's anetilento cosmo, the whole,
Oh my gosh, this is amazing.
yeah, the whole cosmic
Yeah,
order, everything, which is like
yeah.
mind blowing, but it kind of,
Mind blowing,
yeah,
yeah. And
yeah,
and like you said, it's so much better
it
than
is.
thinking of this as the inhabited world. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like, yeah, you go from this very parochial to then even thinking about the inhabited world. And then it's like, from an Orthodox perspective, it's like, yeah, it's got this almost not infinite, but
Mm,
expansiveness that's so
yeah,
beyond anything we can imagine, as far as the incarnation. Like, it's not just enlightening peoples, it's enlightening everything. So anyway, but which in my mind also
love
kind of
that. Yeah.
gets to some of the dynamics of maybe your sense of feeling, God's care and love. Like in the Orthodox tradition, we have this sense of like the energies of God, the activities of God
Hmm.
permeating, all of our reality and all of our creation. And there's something that also connects with, the immersive feeling that you got in Pakistan, with the way that they approached faith in a less kind of two-story, to use Father Stephen Freeman's language, less of a two-story universe and more of a one-story universe where everything is permeated with the divine. And
Hmm.
anyway,
Yeah.
so just some kind
Yeah.
of
No,
reflections on what you're saying.
yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
but well, I mean, there's so many different directions I think we can go in, and I know we're just scratching the tip of the iceberg as far as your story, and who you are. But certainly, I think this sense um, of being, well, it's like, as humans, I think, I can't remember if it was like Heidegger or another existential philosopher who talks about um, what he calls the thrownness of life. I don't know if you've ever heard
Mm,
this term, but it's like, yeah,
mm,
THROWNNES. So in other words, like this sense that, like, when we come to an awareness of our reality, oftentimes we have this feeling that we've been thrown into our circumstances without ever having chosen them. It's like, just like all of a sudden I wake up and I'm on this ship,
hmm. Yeah.
traveling through this, ocean. And so, like, in general, I think humans often have that, but then there's this additional layer in your reality of like, yeah, being a child in this foreign land, which, in a sense wasn't foreign to you on one hand because it was your context, but you knew
Right.
that there was this tension of the kind of like inner world of your family home and the missionary
Right.
community, and then the broader world around you, and then going back to America and how you kind of went back and forth there. Um, so I guess this would be an interesting question to kind of delve in a little more deeply into this question of culture, because I
Yeah.
know that's something you think a lot about. And
Yeah.
um, yeah, how do you see culture now?
Mm,
How do you understand culture? Um, how do you understand culture in relation to your faith? And
mm,
if I may, before I
yeah.
uh, hear what you have to say, another thing I wanted to mention was when you were talking about the call to prayer in the morning and that kind of immersive element. I think I saw on y'all's bookshelf that William Dalrymple's From the Holy
Yeah.
Mountain.
Yeah.
And there's a part in there. I read that when I was in college. It's tracing the journeys of, I believe it was a sixth century. I can't remember, monk John Moscus throughout his basically pilgrimage in the Middle East and Greece. Um, kind of it's called the spiritual metals, where he would like gather little bits of wisdom from different hermits and whatnot. But William Dalrymple kind of traced this, and there's one part where he's talking to monks, Coptic Christian monks from I think St. Anthony's,
Hmm.
if I remember correctly, and you
Yeah.
see one of them pointing in the photo, and it was uh, talking to Dalrymple and explaining to him the last location of the sighting of St. Anthony, which was like 2 nights ago or something like that. Like and just in a very matter of fact way, saying, "Oh yeah, Father so and so just saw St. Anthony, walking a couple days ago," and the author says something like, uh, "I don't know who was more surprised, like the fact that." The monk at my surprise that St. Anthony was sighted, or or how nonchalantly the monk just understood that St. Anthony was just walking around. There was this like cultural disconnect that he said. He also said at some point, like, if Jesus were to come back to Earth, he would probably feel more comfortable, and this is kind of a hot button thing, but he'd probably feel more comfortable with Muslims than he would with evangelical Christians. So anyway,
Yeah. Yeah.
please.
No, wow. I like it. Well,
Oh
yeah.
man.
So this is really interesting, right? Because the supernatural was definitely all around us, right? And then to move back to the rational world of the United States. And here's just a couple of examples of how that works out. So when in both Pakistan and Egypt, when construction workers are building a house, they'll throw in curses to their enemies. So,
Hmm.
an American hears that and goes, yeah, well, big deal. And then they arrive, they're at the house, and their kid has nightmares every single night.
Hmm. Hmm.
Oh, it's just, it's nothing.
Hmm.
Now, from a very young age, I mean, this is why it was so wonderful to become Orthodox and recognize that house blessings were a thing,
Sure.
because they are not in the evangelical world, but they certainly were growing up in Pakistan, where you would pray through these rooms and you would pray through this home and you would pray that God would, would remove any evil that had happened there, that he would provide his grace for the family that was living there. So, it was in evangelical terms, but that was something. Now, in the United States, you don't see that. That is not a part of certainly evangelical tradition. I believe that it might be a part of Anglican. So
Sure.
so yeah, that and in Egypt as well. When we lived in Egypt, and my husband got to experience more than I did, but the stories from the monks in the desert were were very compelling, and you would
Mm.
hear these stories, and I'm sure there's this story is it could be a very common Orthodox story, but I remember first hearing it in Egypt and hearing that, this man goes out during the 40 days of Lent to the desert. A monk goes out and he is determined to, the first person he meets, he is going to explain the salvation message. He's going to let him know, and this is on his mind. So he meets the shepherd, and this shepherd is doing what shepherds do, and he starts talking to this shepherd about God, and the shepherd says, "Oh, I don't know that name, but I know that I talk to someone every day,
Mm,
and he helps me with my sheep, and he does this, and I love this person."
hmm
And so the priest basically walks him through, you know, salvation, if you will, and gets back. This is, he's gone across the Nile. He gets back in the boat to go to back across the Nile, feeling very good about himself. And suddenly he sees this figure walking in the distance on the water. And he turns and it's the shepherd. And the shepherd says, I forgot what you told me. I had to come after you because I forgot what you told me. Please tell me again. And the
Yep.
priest just says, go back and do
Do whatever you
exactly
were
what
doing.
you're doing. So
Such a
I
beautiful, yeah, such a beautiful
it's so
story.
beautiful. And I remember first hearing it in Egypt.
Mm,
It's interesting. I mean, culture, right? Because we're we were surrounded by Muslim culture and Coptic, Coptic minority, but
hmm
very different than the Christian minority in Pakistan, which was very poor
mm,
and tended to live in slums.
mm,
The Coptic Christian minority in Egypt is often tends to be wealthy. There's a rich spirituality, a rich history of going out to the desert at during Lent and visiting these monasteries. Just a couple of years, 2 years ago, when I was in Egypt and I was at this Coptic retreat center that I go to, and it's a Friday, and buses full
mm,
of people arrive, and this whole group of people stayed way beyond Vespers, just singing in the little chapel there.
mm,
So that always, so there was this culture of Christianity, if you will, that I was introduced to in the US at different points, that just felt like it was just butting heads with what I had seen in both Pakistan and Egypt.
mm,
I never saw, I felt like the churches I went to, and this is, there was always this kind of subtle, uh, that God is an American, that there is a unique place, uh, you know, a unique place of love, if you will, that God holds for America and
Sure.
Americans. Um, and that was so at odds with the way I was raised. And I remember my husband and I thought we would be Protestant missionaries for a while, and God was very gracious. We weren't, but but I went to 6 months of Bible school in Chicago
Mm,
because my husband had all the Bible he needed for that track, and I didn't. And so I went to this school in Chicago, and I remember going to taking this class on worship. And I remember being in this class with this professor, and this professor began to ask us what we needed to really worship. And the hands went up. Well, we need good pews. We need a good sound system. We need we need good music and good, and I remember I felt myself beginning to shake, and suddenly it just kind of exploded out of me where I said, what about Dietrich Bonhoeffer? I say, because that was
That's
my context.
hilarious.
But I said, but what about Dietrich Bonhoeffer? And I'm about to cry, and I'm just giving this
Huh.
passionate plea that that we we see what we're talking about, that we discuss this. And the professor did not miss a beat. He looked at me and he said, we are not catering to the Dietrich Bonhoeffers of the world, and just moved right on. And wow, I did not get a good grade in that class.
Huh. So first of all, can for anybody who doesn't know about Dietrich Bonhoeffer, can you just give a little two sentence
Oh, wow. So Dietrich Bonhoeffer was a German theologian who lived during World War II. He was imprisoned, and he wrote a really beautiful book called A Life Together. That's the one
Mhm.
I know the best, but
Yeah,
he was a prolific writer, and his and he actually spoke out about Hitler.
right.
He was vocal in his speaking out. And of course he's in prison, and he writes this book. And so I had read this book in high school,
Hmm.
uh, and yeah, so that's the
No, yeah.
context.
I mean, and yeah, definitely sort of yeah, the other book that my folks had been aware of back when they were before they became Orthodox was the Cost of Discipleship
Yes, yes, yes. Oh,
was
sorry.
another one.
Yes,
Yeah,
that
yeah.
was that was
Which
an
was
amazing
yeah,
book.
kind of gave this impression of like yeah, that authentic Christianity is going to have a cost.
Yes,
It's not, you can't just, you know, believe in Christ and just keep living your,
whatever
very,
you want. Yeah,
yeah. And maybe even in the sense of like affluent or, however you want to put it. But, yeah, so the, kind of the focus on the external sort
yeah.
of necessities of a good sound system and things like that to your, your, heart, which had been raised in this very very different context and
Hmm. Right.
seeing things in a more I don't know humane or I don't know exactly how you would put it way. It just there was this like this very visceral
Really
conflict.
visceral reaction.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and then
exactly.
the professor had no interest in going
No,
there. Yeah, that's interesting.
no interest at all. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And I mean, we've talked about this a little bit in the past about the challenges of being, a third culture kid and caught in between, because there's this sense of like not fully feeling at home in either culture, but, loving both cultures, but kind of being caught in between. Um,
Right.
but on the other hand, you know, yeah, you could be blissfully ignorant. You could have grown up in America, been blissfully
Yeah.
ignorant of this other dynamic, and then not being able to like your mindset not be able to be open to any other alternative, and it begs the question. It's like yeah, like can the gospel of Jesus Christ and up until this point we've been talking primarily about your childhood in a Protestant Christian kind of missionary family, but you've alluded to your conversion with to
Right.
Orthodoxy and things like that. But can the gospel uh, be lived out within the American framework, ethos, and
Right.
how have you wrestled with that? And then
Yeah.
conversely, can an American assimilate the gospel in a way that's where they feel like they're still maintaining their American identity, or I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting you asked that. I was just reading this morning this quote by a Korean theologian about um, culture and ethnicity, and I should try and find it.
Yeah.
Um, um, So, okay, yeah, yeah. Okay, so here it is. That's why so your identity is not fixed by geography or ethnicity, but by the direction of your life towards God's purposes.
Mm.
So, and I think that, I mean,
Can
we
you read
see,
that one more time? Can you
yeah,
can
yeah,
you
for
yeah.
sure. Your identity is not fixed by geography or ethnicity, but by the direction of your life towards God's purposes.
Mm.
So, and living between, I feel like the gift that it gives is that you can look, you can see the beauty in a culture and also see, and there's also brokenness, and
Hmm.
that's
Hmm.
true right across the board, right? There's tremendous beauty in Pakistan. There's tremendous beauty of hospitality, of food, of people, and there's brokenness. And in the United States, tremendous beauty and brokenness. And the brokenness, yeah, the root
Where's the
is this.
beauty in the United States? No, I'm just kidding. I just
Right.
showed my cards. No, I agree. Natural beauty and
Yeah.
Wendell
But
Berry. And,
I
no,
I
anyway,
hear you.
yeah,
I hear you.
it's
So but
that's a bit close.
and one could argue that in a sense, it was a whole lot easier, even when we were raising our kids, to raise our kids in a conservative Muslim society than
Mm.
to raise them once we moved to a secular American
I
society.
mean, I feel like we just need to pause there and just let that sink in because that is a very powerful statement to make. Like
Yeah,
that it was easier as Christians to raise your children in a conservative Muslim society than it would have been or than it was in a secular society. I mean,
right.
because I mean, I feel like the reason why that's so powerful is that I think that yeah, there's this way in which Christianity has learned to learned to become a um, fellow traveler with secularism
Hmm.
um, in a way that makes it feel comfortable to a certain extent, but also innocuous and almost
Hmm.
powerless, to a certain extent as well. That it loses its
Right.
potency, right? And it also has this narrowness of perspective, like the professor of there's this all these different descriptions that fit within that perfect framework
Hmm.
of your other students of your fellow students kind of
Yes.
saying things, and then when there's this like very visceral passionate
Reaction.
reaction that's like outside of that, it's like we're just going to close that down and keep
Yeah.
going.
I think, and that, I mean, I will never forget that. Talk about being shut down. I've had other times where I've been shut down. It's interesting because I have this colleague and he is not a Christian. And we have we've become really good friends and we have amazing discussions. And he was the one, as we were talking about orthodoxy one day, and then we were talking about he was raised in Cambridge, but he is from the Azores. And he's finding himself more and more drawn to the Azores. In fact, he's
Hmm.
there now and he's actually purchased a house there.
Hmm.
And he was the one that first said to me, the thing is, he said, people in Cambridge, he said they talk about not being bound to any religion, but they are. He said they are completely bound
Hmm.
to secularism.
Hmm.
They cannot see the world outside of this. And so they don't know what to do when someone who is Muslim and conservative Muslim is there. I mean, I've had people come to me and say, I don't know how to communicate with this woman because she's wearing hijab, you know. And
That's
so
so interesting. Yeah.
and they're
And
equally.
it's so interesting. It's so interesting to hear it, to consider this notion that somebody is bound to secularism, because
Yeah,
secularism
right.
is all about sort of like rising above, transcending the strictures of conservative or like pre-modern
Mm-hmm.
traditionalism or religiosity or something, and the fact that that there's this claim that is actually that yeah, that secularism is actually a very you know um rigorous religion, let's say.
Right. That
And
imprisons people in many ways. I
that
mean,
often, yeah, that maybe imprisons people more. I mean, it's just because it's not what it appears to be in a certain sense, and like trying to go deeper than just the
right,
appearances and see that there is this religiosity, there is this devotion, there is this
right.
you know, yeah, very like
Adherence,
adherence. Yeah, that as compared to a conservative, Muslim culture or something like that, uh,
right.
that they're in some ways maybe they're not as different as they'd like to think, right? That they're as far as
Yeah,
the religious components, I don't know. It's just interesting to kind of like unveil the kind of secular dynamic a little bit and like, okay, maybe we're not as, liberated, liberated
right,
as we'd like to
right.
think. Yeah.
Right, right, because there's this sense that the person who uh, is driven, or their motivation is faith, is perhaps, that is something that is not quite enough, or I don't
Right.
know.
Anyway,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
yeah,
but it's interesting.
it's
Yeah,
right, right.
yeah.
Anyway, where were we?
I know.
Um, this is so good.
Culture,
This
culture,
is such a
culture, culture
yeah,
was, I mean, that was the big question. And then, kind of the questions of faith and culture of
mhm,
America in particular, and can you have an authentic kind of Christian, life and expression in America as compared to even on the surface level, let's say somebody who doesn't look Christian in a, in a less Western culture, but is living this very, you know, spiritual existence, I guess you could say. Like, yeah,
right,
I don't know what is the question. The question is, yeah, how have you, as a third
right.
culture kid, as someone living in between, how have you attempted to live out an authentic Christian life
Mm,
in America, having the
wow.
history and the experience that you've had?
Wow. Well, that, I mean, that really gets to what led and finally convinced me um, to enter into the Orthodox Church. You know, I would talk about how faith was my oxygen. And I began to, and at the time, I was getting more and more connected to the foreign born Muslim community in
Mm,
Boston.
mm,
And I would talk about faith being my oxygen. And we had amazing commonalities. I mean, it is amazing the way in the Muslim world, or with Muslim friends here, I can get into a discussion on faith in seconds.
mm.
It takes years often to get into a discussion on faith with my non-Christian
Sure,
friends, like
sure.
years.
Yep.
And so that is very freeing for me, because
Yeah.
I will absolutely state on air, if you will, that I know our truth claims are different.
Hmm.
I know that we do not claim the same truth. I know that I that Jesus is seen as a good prophet, the very best prophet, by my Muslim friends, and there's a great respect and a great, belief, even, if you will. And that is my truth claim is different than that.
Hmm.
So I know that, and yet you can have amazing conversations, and some of the struggles of what does it look like, to raise your children. What does it look like to live out faith when you have um, when you have holidays that are faith driven,
Hmm.
or and you need to ask for time off because the overriding culture does not support that. So that's a whole other thing. But I would talk about how faith was my oxygen, and then I remember thinking, oh my gosh, I talk about faith being my oxygen, and basically I've reduced it to 1 hour a week.
Mm,
Like,
hmm.
how there's just this. One of the things we do in nursing is, we have this thing called motivational interviewing, where you help someone see the discrepancy between what they're doing
Mm,
and what they want.
hmm. Hmm.
And so suddenly it's kind of right there in front of me. And more and more I was my husband and I were both struggling to go to church. It was a struggle, and we went for about 3 months, I want to say, not going to church at all. And when we went back, we had a huge fight and we did not miss it. In the
Mm,
meantime, he had been introduced to the Orthodox Church, and his response, the very first time he heard liturgy in English,
mm,
was, "I've come home."
mm.
And my response to that was, "Well, that's nice." And I think back on that, and I really have had repenting to do, right?
Mm,
Because he was, and I've thought about that a lot. What happens when someone is sharing
mm,
a spiritual epiphany and we respond with, "Well, that's nice," and because that's essentially what I did.
mm.
So he had wanted to, and the house started filling with icons. It started filling with, oh my gosh, when the book of Seraphim Rose came, I'm like, that's bigger than the Bible.
I
Like,
know.
send it back.
Right.
So in
Oh, that's
the
funny.
meantime, I let the icons come up, but I was mad. I was like, why do I need this? My parents they have reflected faith so well to me. It's a betrayal, and all kinds of things were going through my head. And so I found that for me, it was entering the Orthodox Church that gave me that ability to, uh, I gotta say, almost live well and authentically within the culture that I found myself, because I then had this home. I mean, our kids will tell you, growing up, I mean, as long as we were overseas, we were fine. But once we got to the US, we changed churches like I changed shoes. We just couldn't find comfort in all the things you're looking for, because you're looking as a consumer.
Mhm,
The
mhm,
big piece of the American church is that
mhm,
you're looking as a consumer. And this is
mm,
actually something that I worry about with converts,
mhm.
because
Sure.
it's a mindset. So are you then you've converted from whatever, and you've entered the Orthodox Church. So, oh, but this one doesn't fit. I don't like this one. Oh, I don't like what the priest said. And I think
Sure.
it's Jonathan Pageau that once said, if you stay around long enough, a priest is always going to say something that makes you just shake your
100%.
head, but you don't stop going. Like
Yep.
it was really, very
Absolutely.
good. And
Yeah.
so this consumer mentality, even though I prided myself on living counterculture, it had completely entered my
Mm,
soul. So entering orthodoxy and finding a home for that, and recognizing it, I don't have answers. I still have so many questions, but there was room for that. There was room for mystery. I remember, it was your father that, um, is my spiritual father, and that helped usher us in, if you will. Your mom, who midwifed me in. I still
good way
remember
to
the
put it.
day I asked her to be my godmother, and she looked at me terrified, like, well, I might not be. And I mean, I can't get together all the time. And I'm like, oh,
Oh,
good. I
thank
was so
God.
afraid I'd have someone that was so sincere,
Right,
you
right,
know,
right. They'd
so it
smother
worked
you.
very
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
But yeah, so um, entering into a faith tradition that gave tools. Now you could take them or leave them, right? I mean, yes, we were encouraged to take them, and I do remember going into kind of a panic at one point, thinking, is this legalistic? I've never felt like my faith has been legalistic, but now this is
Yeah.
legalistic. And I remember, I got to tell you the story because it's so funny.
Please.
It was after our first Lent, and then we became Orthodox. We were baptized into the church on Holy Saturday, and it was. I mean, I'll never forget it. It was an extraordinary day, an extraordinary Pascha.
Mm,
It should be noted that the first Pascha I had ever gone to was in Arizona, and I lasted half an hour, and I was like, hell to
Out
the
of here.
no. I am so out of here. Half an hour,
That's
so and now I just Holy Saturday and Pascha are my favorite days of the whole
yeah.
year. And so it was soon after that, it was the what I got the words wrong and I called it the Peter, Paul, and Mary fast. And I was just mad. It was like, are you kidding me? We've just fasted. This is ridiculous. And I just found myself seething. And
Mm.
I remember a nun saying to me, Mother Nectaria, you might
Oh yeah,
remember
of
her.
course. Yeah.
Yeah. And I remember her saying to me, if you feel it's legalistic, it's not true orthodoxy. And
Hmm.
I've said
Hmm.
that to others who have been in the process of coming into the church. It was
Sure.
so helpful,
That's
so helpful.
beautiful.
And she said, maybe you need to just relax a little during this fast. Maybe it would help if you fasted from other things
Hmm.
or,
Hmm.
and it was so, so helpful. And
That's
another
beautiful.
time where we'd had a family crisis, and I was on the phone with your dad late at night, and I just said, it was Lent, and I said, I haven't been able to fast, and the neighbors are bringing food, and he just said, don't even think about fasting. He said, fast from despair.
Mm.
So I'm going all kinds of different directions, but
No, no, it's good.
essentially it ushered me into a place where there were tools and there was a community, a really unexpected community,
Mm.
and a community that there are a lot of immigrants in the church I attend, and that was a is something that reson resonated with me. I felt like my identity has for so long been between, and yet half to three-quarters of the people here live between, and the others live between too, because it's between Orthodoxy
Yeah.
and the greater um, and then American culture outside, the walls of this church. So that's been a really important journey for me in terms of making peace with living in the US. I also, I don't know, I when I would hear people talk about loving the church, and my parents loved the church, and my
Mm.
brother and sister-in-law who live in Istanbul, they love the church, and they're Protestants, and they're faithful Christians. And I would look in amazement, like, who could love the church? Like, what is there to love about it? And I remember suddenly realizing, this is before I entered into the Orthodox Church. I remember suddenly realizing I hate that which Christ loves.
Mm.
Like, I hate it. I don't want to
Mm.
go. I don't want to give to it. And it was so sobering. It's like
Mm.
I'm given this language of the church as the bride of Christ, and I hate this. It was so, so
Wow.
sobering. I don't know, you know, in my journey, God needed to bring me into this faith tradition of orthodoxy to teach me, to show me the beauty of the church. Um, I don't know why, but that is yeah, I it's an incredible act of grace on his part.
Mm. Well, thank God for that. And I mean, that's what an incredible journey, and also, this sobering and sober
Mm,
expression of repentance and the desire for transformation, of kind of like recognition that
mm,
that that which, as you put it, that which I hate is what God loves. And maybe there is something about this kind of in-betweenness that
yeah,
allows us to be just unsettled enough to
yeah,
not sort of find our, like, not prematurely come to rest in geography
Hmm.
or ethnicity, but to kind of, as that quote from the Korean theologian,
Right.
mentioned, that it's towards this orientation, towards God's purposes, and
Yeah.
that is that's very encouraging, and I think it's also very timely as we enter into Great Lent. That
Right.
we could first of all we could have this anxiety that, oh, Lent's coming, I don't want to be legalistic, right?
Yeah.
And so we could just say, hey, the heck with
Yeah.
Lent, I'm just gonna, or we could try to embrace it as an opportunity for repentance and personal transformation and freedom,
Hmm.
and as a turning of our desires from, you know, a turning of our desires to become more aligned with what God loves, right? In the midst of that. And
Yeah. Yeah, and it's amazing too. I will say that I've had um many Christian friends in outside traditions like say to me, but isn't that legalistic? And I remember looking at one and saying, there is nothing that we have to say no to in American culture. Nothing. If you want to order something at 4 o'clock in the morning, you can do it. If you
be
want
there
to
the next
order
morning. Yeah.
food at 4 o'clock in the morning, if you want to go to any kind of entertainment, you don't even have to go outside of your house. Open up your screen and there it is. There, in a sense, we live in a culture where you can say yes to everything all day long. And to say, no, I actually don't have to do this. I actually don't have to eat meat, and I get to say no to it,
Hmm.
or I
Hmm.
get to do this is and there will be times during it where I think, oh, please, what am I going to eat? The refrigerator is bare, which of course it's not. It's just that I don't
Right.
like anything in it.
Exactly. It's full with foods that are not necessarily our first choice. Yeah.
Exactly. And that was really helpful for me. So I
Mm,
thought, okay,
that's
how can
good.
I now, mind you, you know, ask me this in 5 weeks.
Exactly, right. Once we're deep into the
This is
journey.
why I'll have to remember it. Yeah.
Yeah. But no, I mean, I think the message that I'm hearing, and I think this might be a beautiful place to conclude, is that for those of us who live in America and who live kind of immersed in the American ethos and the American
Hmm.
mindset, which can be one of, exceptionalism and, kind of a messianic
Hmm.
attitude towards the rest of the world, that
Well,
the
complex.
complex, exactly, yeah, that the culture of orthodoxy, of Orthodox Christianity, like immersing ourselves in the culture of the church,
Hmm.
perhaps can, you know, humble that mindset just enough to be able to open it towards a more universal,
Hmm.
even cosmic, but definitely universal, attitude towards the rest of the world, to seeing my own place as this kind of small, you know,
Yeah.
you know, small in a beautiful way, member of God's creation,
Hmm.
and yeah, and to see the beauty of the other, of the foreigner, of, in our midst or in another country, or and the beauty of
Yeah.
those exchange experiences. And I don't know. So yeah, I think that kind of resonated with me, of like the culture of orthodoxy, the culture of our faith being
Hmm.
one that can allow us to also bridge all these other
Right.
sort of cultural
Right.
dynamics. I don't know
Right.
if that makes
No,
sense.
that resonates with me as well. I think that I do know that I've um I've come to a tremendous peace, whereas there really was a lot of restless wandering and just this um just this sense of, will I ever belong, or what does it look like to belong, or my favorite place is, on the airplane because then nothing is required of me and everyone's in between and
Hmm.
all of
Hmm.
that. And I do feel like that has um there are still days. Yesterday, as I was walking through the grocery store, I just thought, I don't know if I'll ever get used to American grocery stores, like there's no less than 53 different kinds of cereal, I'm sure, maybe more. And it just suddenly I'm so overwhelmed all over again.
Mm,
So it's not all the time, but overall, there's I have a far greater peace than I have had at any other time in my life. There isn't this I must get over that international border, and
mm,
if I don't, I
hmm
will die.
hmm hmm hmm
Yeah.
Sure, sure. Well, that's beautiful, and yeah, and again, I think a beautiful place to end our conversation, and just wow, so much to contemplate and to kind of appreciate about your story and your journey, and the kind of experiences and reflections that you've had along the way with your husband and with your family and your
Mm,
family of origin. And yeah, so I'm really grateful for you coming on and sharing all of this. And I'm very confident that those who watch and listen will glean a lot from this conversation, and on some levels to complexify our questions about faith and culture in a good way,
mm,
and in other ways to sort of simplify and
yeah.
hone in on the essence of our identity as children of God, um,
Mhm.
in that universal sense, and to humble ourselves before Great Lent, and allow the Holy Spirit to teach us what we need to learn this Lent, hopefully in ways that we can understand and and palate to a certain extent.
Yeah. Well,
Well,
thank you. Thanks so much.
thank you so much, Marilyn, and yeah, it's a joy, and I wish you and everyone a blessed and fruitful Great Lent.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
All right, God bless.